The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under the door like a blade through flesh. Elias Kane, barely 19, stared at the crisp envelope, his name scrawled in his father's jagged script, and knew it was a guillotine. Inside, a check for $50,000 and a single line: "Leave, and don't come back." Elias stood frozen in the cramped Brooklyn apartment he shared with his triplet brothers, Noah and Caleb. The three of them, born minutes apart, had been inseparable since childhood, their bond forged in the crucible of a conservative family that valued appearances over love. Their father, Pastor Samuel Kane, led a megachurch in upstate New York, preaching fire and brimstone while his sons hid their truths in the shadows. Elias was the first to come out, at 17, his voice trembling but resolute. Noah followed, quieter but no less certain. Caleb, the fiercest, had fought the hardest to stay silent, but love had a way of breaking even the strongest walls. The check was their father's final verdict. Elias, deemed the instigator, was to take it and vanish. Noah and Caleb were spared, but only if they stayed and repented. The ultimatum was clear: one son exiled to save the family's image, or all three would be cast out. Elias clutched the check, his hands shaking, not from fear but from rage. "They think they can buy my silence," he whispered, his hazel eyes burning. Noah, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looked up from his journal, his glasses fogging with unshed tears. "We go together, or we don't go at all," he said softly. Caleb, pacing like a caged animal, slammed his fist against the wall. "Let's burn it. The money, the church, all of it." But Elias knew better. Burning bridges wouldn't free them, it would trap them. "We take it," he said, voice steady despite the storm in his chest. "We take it, and we build something they can't touch." That night, under the flickering glow of a single bulb, the triplets made a pact. They'd leave New York, start over, and prove their worth, not to their father, but to themselves. San Francisco beckoned, a city of dreamers and outcasts, where they could be free. They packed one bag each, pooling the $50,000 to chase a life unbound by shame. The journey west was a blur of Greyhound buses and cheap motels, each mile a step away from the past. San Francisco greeted them with fog and promise, its hills alive with color and chaos. They found a tiny apartment in the Mission District, its walls peeling but its windows wide, letting in the salty Pacific breeze. Elias, the planner, enrolled in community college, studying tech with a hunger that startled his professors. Noah, the dreamer, found work at a bookstore, losing himself in poetry and stories of love that mirrored his own. Caleb, the fighter, took odd jobs, bartending, construction, his charm masking the anger he carried like a second skin. Their first year was a crucible. Money dwindled fast. The $50,000 was a drop in the bucket against San Francisco's soaring costs. Elias coded late into the night, building apps for extra cash. Noah wrote in stolen moments, his words a lifeline to hope. Caleb, though, struggled. His temper flared at slights, real or imagined, and he'd vanish for days, returning with bruised knuckles and haunted eyes. One night, Elias found him on the fire escape, staring at the city lights. "I don't know how to be happy," Caleb admitted, voice raw. Elias sat beside him, their shoulders touching. "We're learning," he said. Together. Their bond held them through hunger and doubt, but love, real, reckless love, tested them in ways they hadn't expected. Elias met Julian, a graphic designer with a laugh like sunlight, at a hackathon. Their connection was instant, electric, but Julian's family, wealthy and traditional, disapproved of Elias's complicated past. Noah fell for Mia, a trans poet who worked at the bookstore, her courage inspiring him to write openly about his identity. Caleb, wary of vulnerability, kept his heart guarded until he met Leo, a chef with a quiet strength that disarmed him. Each romance was a leap of faith, a defiance of the voices that had once called their love sin. But the past wasn't done with them. A letter from their mother arrived, pleading for them to return, to fix themselves. It was a dagger to Elias's heart. He'd always hoped she'd fight for them. Noah read it and cried, but Caleb tore it to shreds. "They don't get to define us," he growled. Elias nodded, but the ache lingered. They were building a life, but the weight of rejection followed them like a shadow. By the end of that first year, Elias had an idea, a tech startup that could change everything. He called it Triad, a nod to their unbreakable bond. With Noah's storytelling and Caleb's grit, they pitched it to investors, their passion outshining their inexperience. A venture capitalist, moved by their story, gave them their first break, $500,000 to build Triad into something real. As they signed the deal, Elias felt the check from their father burning a hole in his memory. This was their answer, not silence, but creation. Triad was born in a flurry of code, coffee, and courage. Elias, Noah, and Caleb poured their souls into it, each bringing something vital. Elias's vision for an app that connected marginalized communities, Noah's words that gave it heart, and Caleb's hustle that kept them afloat. Their tiny apartment became a war room, littered with laptops and takeout containers. San Francisco buzzed around them, its queer heart beating in sync with their own. But success wasn't a straight line. Investors were skeptical of three young, openly gay men with no pedigree. "You're a risk," one said bluntly. Elias smiled, "All steel. We're a revolution." The app's core was simple but bold, a platform where LGBTQ+ people could find community, resources, and safety. Elias coded features like encrypted chat and local event finders, while Noah crafted stories of real users, people like them, searching for belonging. Caleb, ever the pragmatist, handled logistics, charming suppliers, and negotiating deals. They worked through nights, fueled by dreams and desperation. Julian, Mia, and Leo became their anchors, offering love when the world felt heavy. Julian designed Triad's sleek interface, Mia wrote its manifesto, and Leo cooked for them when they forgot to eat. But cracks began to show. Caleb's temper flared under pressure, especially when investors pushed for changes that diluted their vision. "They want us to be less us," he snapped after a meeting. Noah, usually the peacemaker, struggled with his own doubts. His poetry, once a refuge, felt trivial next to Elias's code and Caleb's fire. "Am I even contributing?" he asked one night, voice small. Elias pulled him into a hug. "You're our soul, Noah. We'd be nothing without you." It was true, but Noah's insecurity lingered, a quiet poison. The first big win came when Triad launched its beta. Downloads spiked, and users flooded the app with stories of connection. A trans teen finding a mentor, a rural gay couple discovering a nearby support group. The triplets celebrated with cheap wine and tears, but the high was short-lived. Their father's church caught wind of Triad, and Samuel Cain unleashed a campaign against it. Sermons vilified the app as a tool of sin, and online trolls targeted them with hate. Elias's inbox filled with threats, Noah's poems were mocked, and Caleb nearly punched a reporter who called them troubled youth. The pressure was suffocating, but they pushed forward, refusing to break. Love, too, grew complicated. Julian's family demanded he distance himself from Elias, threatening to cut him off. "I love you," Julian said, eyes wet, "but I don't know if I'm strong enough for this." Elias, heartbroken, gave him space, but the loss cut deep. Noah and Mia faced their own storm when Mia's ex, a jealous artist, outed her on social media, stirring transphobic backlash. Caleb and Leo, meanwhile, clashed over Caleb's recklessness, late nights, fights, and a refusal to open up. "You're pushing me away," Leo said, voice breaking. Caleb wanted to argue, but the truth stung. A turning point came when a major tech conference invited Triad to present. It was their shot at legitimacy, but the stakes were brutal. They needed more funding to scale, and failure could kill the app. Elias prepared relentlessly. Noah wrote a speech that bled vulnerability, and Caleb schmoozed investors with a charm he barely felt. The night before the conference, they sat on their rooftop, the city sprawling below. "What if we fail?" Noah whispered. Caleb, usually brash, took his hand. "Then we fail together." Elias nodded, his heart full. "But we won't." The presentation was a triumph. Elias's passion, Noah's words, and Caleb's fire captivated the room. Offers poured in, and Triad secured $10 million in funding. They were no longer outcasts. They were pioneers. But as they celebrated, a new letter arrived from their mother, this time with a photo of their childhood home. "Your father is sick," she wrote. "Come home." Elias stared at it, torn between anger and guilt. Noah clutched his journal, silent. Caleb laughed bitterly. Let him rot. But the past, like a ghost, refused to stay buried. The funding changed everything, and nothing. Triad exploded, its user base doubling monthly as media hailed it as a game changer. Elias, Noah, and Caleb moved to a proper office in Soma, hiring a small team of misfits who shared their fire. But success didn't erase the scars. Their father's illness hung over them, a shadow they couldn't shake. Elias felt the pull of duty, Noah wrestled with forgiveness, and Caleb buried his pain in work. "We don't owe them anything," Caleb said, but his voice lacked conviction. Elias threw himself into Triad, coding new features to protect users from harassment. The app now had safe spaces for mental health, legal aid, and even job boards. He worked until his eyes burned, driven by a need to prove their father wrong. Noah, meanwhile, published a collection of poems inspired by their journey, dedicating it to Mia. The book gained a cult following, but Noah struggled with the spotlight, haunted by their mother's letter. Caleb took on the role of public face, charming reporters and deflecting questions about their past. But at night, he'd slip away to Leo's restaurant, seeking solace in silence. Their relationships teetered. Julian returned, apologizing for his family's pressure, but Elias was guarded, afraid of another betrayal. "I need time," he told Julian, hating the distance in his own voice. Noah and Mia grew closer, but her ex's harassment escalated, forcing her to take a restraining order. Caleb and Leo hit a breaking point when Caleb missed Leo's restaurant opening, too consumed by Triad. "I can't keep waiting for you," Leo said, walking away. Caleb didn't chase him, but the loss left him hollow. The church's attacks intensified. Samuel, despite his illness, rallied his congregation to boycott Triad, calling it a cancer on society. Protesters picketed their office, and a hacking attempt nearly crashed the app. Elias traced it to a group linked to the church, his blood boiling. "They won't stop," he told his brothers. Noah, usually soft-spoken, suggested they fight back, not with fists, but with truth. They launched a campaign sharing user stories, flooding social media with tales of resilience. It worked. Support for Triad surged, drowning out the hate. But the victory felt hollow when Elias learned their father had cancer, with months to live. The triplets debated returning. Elias wanted closure, Noah sought understanding, but Caleb refused. "He threw us away," he said, voice shaking. "Why should we care?" Yet, when their mother called, sobbing, Elias booked flights to New York. The reunion was a battlefield. Samuel, frail but unyielding, offered no apology, only judgment. "You're still lost," he rasped. Elias stood tall, his brothers at his side. "We're found," he said, and they walked away, hearts heavy but unbroken. Back in San Francisco, Triad soared. A major tech giant offered to buy it for $500 million. The triplets faced a choice: sell and secure their future, or keep fighting for their vision. Elias wanted to stay independent, Noah feared losing their soul, and Caleb saw the money as a way to silence their past. They argued for days, their bond straining under the weight of it all. In the end, they compromised, They'd sell a stake but retain control. The deal brought $100 million, enough to expand Triad globally. As they signed, Elias thought of the $50,000 check, a seed that had grown into an empire. But the past called again. Their father died, and their mother begged them to attend the funeral. Elias felt the old wound reopen. Noah wrestled with guilt, and Caleb's anger flared anew. They went, not for their father, but for themselves. The service was a spectacle, the church packed with mourners who didn't know the truth. Elias stood in the back, Noah's hand in his, Caleb's jaw tight. They didn't speak, but their presence was a quiet rebellion. The funeral marked a turning point, but not the end. Back in San Francisco, the triplets channeled their grief into Triad. The app became a global force, connecting millions across borders. Elias led with vision, Noah with heart, and Caleb with unrelenting drive. They hired more staff, opened offices in London and Tokyo, and partnered with NGOs to support queer youth worldwide. Yet, the weight of their father's rejection lingered, a ghost they couldn't banish. Elias rekindled things with Julian, but trust was slow to rebuild. They started couples therapy, learning to navigate love's fragile edges. Noah and Mia moved in together, their apartment a haven of books and art. Mia's ex was prosecuted, giving her peace, and Noah's poetry readings drew crowds, his words a beacon for others. Caleb, though, struggled most. Leo had moved on, and Caleb's loneliness fueled reckless nights. One evening, drunk and broken, he showed up at Leo's restaurant. "I messed up," he admitted. Leo, softened but cautious, agreed to talk. It was a start. Triad faced new challenges. Competitors emerged, copying their model but lacking their soul. A data breach exposed user info, sparking outrage. Elias worked tirelessly to fix it, implementing ironclad security. Noah wrote an open letter to users, owning the mistake and vowing transparency. Caleb faced the press, his charm defusing the storm. The crisis passed, but it reminded them how fragile their dream was. They doubled down, adding features like mental health hotlines and scholarship funds for queer students. Their mother reached out, seeking forgiveness. She'd left the church, living alone in a small apartment. Elias was wary, Noah hopeful, Caleb indifferent. They met her in New York, a tense lunch where she apologized for her silence. "I was weak," she said, tears falling. Noah hugged her, but Elias and Caleb held back. Healing would take time, if it came at all. They left with no promises, but the meeting stirred something in Elias, a spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. Triad's growth caught the eye of Wall Street. A public offering loomed, promising billions but threatening their control. Elias resisted, fearing they'd lose their mission. Noah, now confident in his voice, argued for it, seeing the funds as a way to amplify their impact. Caleb, pragmatic as ever, crunched the numbers and saw freedom in wealth. They voted to go public, but only after securing protections for Triad's core values. The IPO was a sensation, valuing Triad at $10 billion. The triplets, once outcasts, were now icons. But money didn't heal everything. Elias grappled with imposter syndrome, wondering if he deserved this. Noah faced burnout, his poetry suffering under the weight of fame. Caleb's reunion with Leo faltered when old habits resurfaced. One night, they gathered on their office rooftop, the city glittering below. "Are we happy?" Noah asked. Elias looked at his brothers, their faces etched with scars and strength. "We're trying," he said. Caleb nodded, rare vulnerability in his eyes. "That's enough for now." Their mother's next letter was different. She'd started volunteering at a shelter for queer youth, inspired by Triad. "I'm proud of you," she wrote. Elias read it aloud, his voice catching. Noah cried, and even Caleb softened. They didn't respond, but the words lingered. The past was still there, but it no longer defined them. Triad was their legacy, a testament to love's resilience. As they stood together, the city's pulse echoing their own. Elias felt a truth settle in his bones. They'd built something greater than pain. Years passed, and Triad became a cornerstone of the queer community worldwide. Elias, Noah, and Caleb, now in their 30s, were no longer the scared boys who'd fled with a check. They were leaders, flawed but fierce, their bond a lighthouse through every storm. Triad's reach extended to schools, shelters, and crisis centers, saving lives they'd never meet. Yet, the triplets' own lives were still a work in progress, a canvas of triumphs and quiet battles. Elias and Julian married in a small ceremony by the Pacific, their vows a promise to keep fighting, for each other, for their community. Noah's second book, a memoir, topped charts, his words healing others as they'd once healed him. He and Mia adopted a foster child, a queer teen named Alex, giving them the family they'd always craved. Caleb and Leo reconciled, slowly rebuilding trust. Leo opened a second restaurant, and Caleb, softer now, was there for the launch, cheering louder than anyone. The triplets never fully reconciled with their mother, but they found peace in distance. She sent letters, each one warmer, detailing her work at the shelter. Elias kept them in a box, unsure if he'd ever reply. Noah wrote her back, brief but kind. Caleb ignored them, but he no longer tore them up. The past was a scar, not a wound. Triad's success brought scrutiny. Activists criticized its corporate ties, demanding more grassroots focus. Elias listened, redirecting profits to community grants. Noah hosted forums, amplifying marginalized voices. Caleb, ever the fighter, took on detractors, defending Triad's mission. The criticism sharpened them, reminding them why they'd started. They weren't perfect, but they were relentless. One day, a package arrived at their old Brooklyn apartment, forwarded to San Francisco. Inside was their father's will, naming them heirs to his estate, $100 million. A note, in his handwriting, read, "I was wrong." Elias stared at it, numb. Noah wept, not for the money but for the apology that came too late. Caleb laughed, bitter but free. He thought this would fix it, he said, tossing the note aside. They didn't need the money. Triad was their fortune, built from pain and love. Elias proposed they donate it, every cent, to queer charities, shelters, and scholarships. Noah and Caleb agreed, no hesitation. They sent the funds anonymously, with a single line, from the Kane triplets. No press release, no fanfare. Their silence was their answer, louder than any sermon. As they stood on their office rooftop, now a ritual, San Francisco sprawled before them, a city that had cradled their dreams. Elias thought of the $50,000 check, a bribe to erase them. They'd turned it into a legacy that outshone their father's hate. Noah, holding Alex's hand, spoke of hope. Caleb, arm around Leo, grinned, his anger finally quiet. They weren't just brothers, they were a revolution. The stars above blinked, witnesses to their triumph. Elias looked at his brothers, their faces lit by city lights and love. "We did it," he said, voice thick. Noah smiled, Caleb nodded, and for the first time, they felt whole. The world hadn't broken them, it had made them. And in their silence, they'd answered every doubt, every hate, with a life built on truth.